heading to the other side of planet Earth to catch up with one of the world's original packrafters who cut his teeth tackling the frigid rivers of Alaska back in the early 80s, and from there has ventured across to this side of the planet, to the rivers of Tasmania, and specifically the one that we love, the raw one, the wild one, the Franklin River, one of Australia's mightiest. Welcome to the show today, Roman Dial.
Thank you, Ben. It's good to be here.
And so you are in which part of the world? You're in Alaska.
Sure. I'm in Anchorage, Alaska, right sort of in the south coast of Alaska. And the weather here is more like the interior of Alaska this winter, which is really cold and brutally cold. I lived there for about 10 years, and I've been living in Anchorage now about 30 or 35 years, and love living here. It's great.
It's a part of the world that I haven't yet explored. I would love to get over there at some point. I'm pretty au fait with the cold and the frigid conditions that above the Arctic Circle provides. We take a group of people every year to go into our Extreme Dreams Challenge. We're leaving in 7 days, and it's currently about -25, -30 in the north of Norway where we're heading. So I feel you, I understand you. Not much pack rafting happening for you at this time of year, no doubt.
No pack rafting. I have done a little bit of its sort of winter cousin, which is what we call wild skating. And wild skating is taking ice skates to frozen ponds and lakes and lagoons and rivers and marshes and skating around, and sometimes even like traveling cross country for 100 miles or more, camping along the way.
Wow.
And it's hard to find constant lake or pond ice for that far. So sometimes you have to walk in between water bodies, a lot like you have to walk in between water bodies with a pack raft.
I love, from doing a bit of research here, Lauren, who works for Wild Earth, has done some amazing sort of links to some of the things you've done, some of the concepts, some of the names of these travel methods that you've pioneered really are so unique and so different. I mean, that's one of them, the ice travel. Pack rafting itself is usually a means of going from sort of one river maybe to another river, and that becomes that bike packing or bike rafting. There's another method there, and then there's these canopy journeys. Just give us some of these insights about these different concepts that you've sort of pioneered.
Well, sure. I think what happened is when you live in Alaska, if you want to travel around, you need a way to cross the rivers and streams because there's very few bridges. There's no trails really. There's very few hiking trails or bridges, so you're basically bushwhacking and off-trail travel, and you can only go so far here without carrying a small boat. And the first small boats I was exposed to were from an old man. Yeah, I mean, I'm older than he was 55 and I was 21. Now I'm 65, and he just passed away at 98. But that old man was
Wow.
brilliant. He had like this inflatable vinyl raft that he used during this. We called it a wilderness race. It was like a point-to-point race across this Kenai Peninsula. It was like 150 miles, and we were all getting ready to swim the river when he showed up and pulled this small vinyl raft that he'd bought at a convenience store basically, and blew it up and paddled across while we swam with backpacks and rain gear. And at that moment, a light bulb went on my head. And in the following year, I found a better raft, and that changed my life. I've been using the pack raft in every different way I could since then.
Just put a year on that for me. Just sort of talk to me about how long ago this was, because this is obviously, it's quite a fashionable means of new travel now, but obviously this was the early days of this.
Yeah, that was 1982 when I first saw Dick Griffith with his vinyl raft crossing this glacial river that was, I don't know how deep it was because I never felt the bottom when I swam it. And it was icy cold, and we had a backpack. We all had backpacks on for like a week. We were traveling cross country, so we had to carry all the food and equipment that we needed for this race. It was before any of those adventure races. Like it was before the race they had in New Zealand or the Raid Gauloise or any of the others, and it was something that some Alaskan had kind of dreamed up. And once we started using the boats to cross rivers, we realized you could float the rivers too. And then over the decades, so basically in the 1980s, there was only one quality raft and a lot of poor quality rafts. And the one quality raft was called a Sherpa pack raft, and it was made by the same people who made these early aluminum and neoprene snowshoes. And they made these rafts, and they weighed like 4 pounds and 4 ounces. They were very durable nylon, just as durable as
Yeah.
the alpacas are today. They had a smaller tube, like 10-inch tubes. And I wrote them and said, I've been using these rafts to run class 3 water. We hike from river to river, and I love these boats. And, I could help you with the marketing if you want. And they're like, no, no, no. These boats are made only for calm water. We don't really even want to hear about what you're doing. It sounds neat, but please don't write us again. And so they kind of went extinct after, I don't know, about 5 or less than 10 years. No, they couldn't sell any boats because they cost $500, and nobody saw a purpose for them because
Wow.
they were selling a $500 boat to put your child in and sit in calm water, and they gave you little silly pool toy paddles. The boats were
Yes.
great, but the paddles were no good. And so those boats didn't really sell. They went out of business, and I started making boats myself using their pattern. But I wasn't very good at making them. The boats I made looked like a 12-year-old boy who was huffing glue to put them together. And so I sold like a few. I kept a couple for myself, and I used them for about I guess 6 or 8 years, 8 years until Alpaca Raft
Yeah.
produced their first boat, which had much bigger tubes, same durability, different construction, like one big tube instead of two tubes. And uh, and once the Alpaca came around, and they wanted me to run whitewater and use it for the kinds of trips that I wanted to use it for. And then that's kind of taken off. They've been around for about 25 years now, and then the boats they make today are basically as good as kayaks for just about for 95% of what anybody would want to do with a kayak. You can do it with one of the new alpacas.
I think I made that grave error and actually took an alpaca for the 5% that you're talking about where you wouldn't want to use it. And I stupidly tried to paddle it across a lake into a headwind. And that was one of my most endurance based personal challenges I've ever done, where the beach in the distance got no closer. I remember it was my birthday. It was about my 42nd birthday. I went away for an overnight stay to go and paddle the Noosa Everglades. And it wasn't the best conditions for it. You need flow, you need current, you need to move, and you need to have a destination. So across a lake, I'm the 5%er. The other 95%, I want to unwrap over the next hour and talk to you about some of the adventures. For anybody that is just tuning into Wild Chats, I'm speaking to Roman Dial. He's an explorer, scientist, a long-time Alaska Pacific University professor who spent decades building expeditions that blend math-brain decision-making with wild country travel. He's got degrees in both mathematics and biology, awesome combination, including a PhD in biological sciences from Stanford. He's one of the few people who's helped popularize pack rafting way back in the 1980s and has made it this mainstream activity now, combining hiking, bike packing, backpacking, and then climbing up into the trees for something we're going to unwrap a little later on. He's got a reputation for creative human-powered travel ideas like, and here they come, hell biking and canopy trekking. They're really unique ideas. I like the idea of hell biking. I think we'll probably unwrap that a little bit later. You started off in the world over there in Alaska doing these, but obviously you've come across to Australia's shores, and that's a big part of the conversation today is how you've been down to that southern state that sometimes people miss off the map, that beautiful island called Tasmania. What was your introduction to Australia?
Well, yeah, great question. So, I was working on my PhD in the canopy of rainforests in the Caribbean, and I was living there, with my wife and my two kids. And a National Geographic magazine came, and it had an article about Western Australia, and the coast between Perth and Broome.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, wow, let's go there, and at the same time, I got a newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, and had a full page ad from an airline that was flying to Australia from San Francisco for the same cost it would be for us to fly from San Francisco to Alaska. And we would get as
No
many
way.
miles on the airline flying to Australia to fly to Alaska. So basically, it was like fly to Alaska, go to Australia for free, And
Yeah,
so,
nuts.
um, and we flew to Sydney, and then they just deregulated the airline, so it was pretty inexpensive to fly to Perth. And we rented a little tiny econo car, a little box, and we
Mm-hmm.
drove from Perth down to the south. the tip down south. I forget the name of it, but to the big kauri trees. They have some giant trees down there. And then we drove up the west coast to Broome and on to Fitzroy Crossing. And that was in 1991. And my wife and kids, we all loved it. My kids were 2 and 4. It was the most awesome road trip of my life, really. And
Mm,
so that was my first introduction. But then after um, but way before that, 10 years before that, I'd seen a video of people taking what looked like pack rafts, but they were bigger. And they looked like they were better suited for running water than they were for carrying between waters. Like the pack raft,
yeah,
you could pack it up, put it in your pack, weight a couple kilos, hike to another river, avoid the lakes. And this thing looked much more whitewater worthy, but too heavy to carry. They had gigantic paddles, and
yeah,
they were running this river. It was called the Franklin River, and I saw it on a video in like 1983 or 84, and I'd only had my pack rat for a couple years, and I thought, this is like convergent evolution. The same kind of
yeah.
boat has evolved on the other end of the earth. I've got to go run the Franklin, but I didn't get to the Franklin until 2001. So like it was 20 years, almost 20 years when I first saw the Franklin that I got there. But by then I'd been to Australia several times. I'd gone there with my wife and kids in 1991 for a family trip. I did the Eco Challenge
Hmm.
in Queensland in 1997, and then my
The adventure
wife and
racing
kids.
series, hey?
Yeah, yep. We were the
Yeah,
first. That was back when American teams weren't any good, and we came in eighth place, and we're the first
right.
American team. We were in
Yeah.
about fifth place until we got to the sea kayaking bit, going into Cairns, and we just got reeled in like spawned out salmon by the Kiwi teams and the
Wow.
Aussie team. So we fell
Wow.
from fifth place to eighth place when they just paddled right by us. But
Yeah, eco challenge. I mean, adventure racing is such a beautiful multidiscipline sport. It seems like this is sort of part of the thing that you do is you like to sort of cross genres for your adventures, whether it's sort of planning them, like you say, with the ice or the pack rafting. I think it keeps the human brain a little bit more excited than these 10 or 20 day expeditions using a single means of transport. Pairing things up, adventure racing is always the thing that entices me to get outdoors and try different things.
yeah, no, I absolutely agree. But a lot of it stems from just being in Alaska, where once you leave the road and there are no trails, you need to be able to, cross a glacier with skis. You need to cross a
Mm,
river with a little boat. You need to have some climbing skills because there's always something you have to scramble over when there are no trails. You need to bushwhack, and then if you're going to carry all that gear, you need to know how to go without a lot of other things so that you can actually move with so much gear. And so, our tents don't have any floors. Some of those bicycle trips, we didn't take spoons. We ate off of our wrenches. The ski
Everything needs two
trips,
uses. I love it. That's economizing in your packing. Well done.
yeah, that's it exactly. But
Uh,
yeah, so that's kind of how it all came about.
and the Franklin itself, why did it stand out then? Because I only came to know about the Franklin River having taken my first Tasmania trip, and then worked with a friend down there, Elias, who runs now Franklin River Rafting. Him and his partner. But obviously, the Franklin stood out for you from an international perspective. What was the draw card to it?
Well, I saw those boats. I saw those kind of Australian version of a pack raft, and they were filming these boats because they wanted to dam the Franklin back in the 80s. And
Yes.
they were
Yeah.
doing this, I think his name was Bob Brown. He was not quite a politician yet. He was an environmentalist at the time, and he was organizing a blockade to stop the dam. And it just looked really cool. I thought, yeah, these Australians are burly people. Here they are running all this whitewater with their pack rafts, and I was still nervous about whitewater at that point. So when I finally got the chance to go down there, I did it, and I'd say that the Franklin River is one of the best temperate rivers in the whole southern hemisphere because it's long and wild. I not that I'm a world traveler like you, but I have been around the block, and I've seen like in southern South America, like in Patagonia, they don't have the kinds of rivers that are as
Yes.
enjoyable as
Yeah.
the Franklin. They're not, they can be long, but the wind is nasty, and there's
Mm.
cattle all over. And then in New Zealand, I love New Zealand, but I don't love New Zealand as much as I love Australia, because no offense to the Kiwi people out there, but I find their scenery is beautiful. I love the West Coast, but their mountain scenery is kind of like mediocre Alaska mountain scenery, and I don't need to
Yeah.
go down
Yeah.
there for that. But Australia, on the other hand, Tasmania especially, it's got this long, wild river. There's no roads crossing it once you leave the first bridge, and it's rugged country. It cuts through the mountains. It feels totally wild, and the water is not impossible. You can portage the hard rapids, and then
Mm.
it kind of ends at tidewater. And there's all kinds of neat animals that live in Tasmania, like the different kinds of wallabies, and they've got interesting snakes and lots of beautiful, fascinating birds. So it's much more interesting to me as a biologist than New
Yeah.
Zealand is.
So it wasn't just, I suppose that's the fix for you, isn't it? You've got you're coming from the sort of educational side and your history and your knowledge, but also from the adventurous side, and pairing them two together when you've got uniqueness of species gives you the reason why Tasmania comes up trumps. The Franklin itself is very much a once you're on, you're in for the long run, and then you come out and you spill out onto the ocean as the sort of final part of it. So in your trip planning and your training for that, were you looking at a sort of 10-day trip, a 2-day, 2-week trip? How did it sort of, when you're setting yourself up to go, how long are we going to need to survive for? This is back in 2002. So you've got the plan, you've got all the gear. Was it just you running it? How did it sort of work to sort of build the first parts of this journey?
Sure. Well, what happened is I had brought down another alpaca raft. This was back in the day when the alpaca rafts were like stubby little boats, and they
Mm.
were kind of oval shaped, and they didn't have any kind of spray deck. So they very much were a boat, like a bucket boat that would fill up with water. And so you had to paddle it more like a canoe than like a kayak. You paddle it with a
Yeah.
kayak paddle,
Yeah.
but you kind of back paddle when you go through the rapids. And we went and talked. There was a partner that I was doing some tree climbing with, and I brought a boat for him. And we had gone and talked to this boater who'd been down it multiple times. Somebody said I should go talk to him, and he was very discouraging. And by the time we got to the put in, my partner was like, Roman, I don't think I'm not up for this. I'd rather go surfing out on the West Coast. I don't. I'm not. Would you be okay if I didn't go? And I was like, yeah, I'll do it
What a
myself. So
moment.
it really was like right at the bridge. I forgot the name of the bridge right there, but I was committed to doing it. And so I left and headed down by myself. And I think I took about a week's worth of food, but maybe I did it in like 5 or 6 days.
Yeah.
I had to portage a couple things and I swam a couple things. I cut my boat at a portage around this really large rapid. A rock sliced my tube, and there's a big overhanging kind of cave that everybody normally camps. I didn't see anybody on the river when I was on it, but I camped there and
Wow.
patched the raft because you can't get out of it, like you said. I had to cut a dry bag apart and then find glue and use the glue, that a little bit of glue I had, put the patch on the inside and put duct tape on the outside. But it was quite a moment there to have a boat completely deflated and cut wide open in
Yes.
such a wild, remote place.
It's the ethos of true adventure, really, isn't it? You've gone with the gear you expect to use. You've been thrown. The lifeline has been taken away of having someone go with you. So very much you're on your own. And I mean that's a sink or swim moment just for you to say yes, I'm going to go and do it, isn't it? I mean you were committed. Obviously the other person wasn't quite as up for the challenge, but to go through that and then to paddle off and put your first blade in the water, that must be quite a moment to get to.
Yeah, it was. And I have done solo trips. I don't prefer them. I like to be with people. I really enjoy beautiful moments, and challenging
Mm.
moments are a lot easier when you have a partner along. And my wife is my favorite person to do things with, and I did a lot with my kids when they were younger. But at that moment, yeah, I wasn't going to say no to. I was right there. I'd come, halfway around the world, and there it was. I wasn't going to pass it by, and I've been wanting to do that river for 20 years.
Thinking about your exit, then you know your number of days roughly you're going to take. Was that really then about? I suppose the flow of the river is such an important part of it. The speed you're going at, where you have to portage. Were you gaining a lot of information from the local or the locals about where you might get to in the course of a day and where you might camp out, or was it just, hey, this looks good, let's pull up on this beach or rock or wherever you overnighted?
Sure. Well, there was a little guidebook that I found that this fella had told me about, this guy in Hobart. And I bought this little waterproof book and I kept it tucked in my PFD. I forget what it's called, but it was a beautiful book because it had a lot of interesting stories and then just enough information that you knew the rapids were coming up, but not so much that it took away from the adventure. And some places it was obvious, I camped where other people had camped. And the river, I think that maybe the river is called the Ever Changing Flood or something like that, but the
Hmm.
water goes up and down a lot, so it can be quite low one day and you don't go very fast, and then it rains and it comes up a meter and you're just rocketing down, so it's hard to really plan too tightly. I think, the best planning, as far as I'm concerned, is to be ready for whatever comes, like
Mm.
and mentally ready. Maybe not equipment and food wise. I think food is light. If you start with 20 pounds of food and you end with no food, the food weighed 10 pounds on average. But you start with 20 pounds of gear and you end with 20 pounds of gear, that gear weighed
Yes.
20 pounds the whole way. I've always found we, you can do without things, but it's hard to do without food, especially
Mm.
if you're with somebody else. If you don't have enough food, you don't get along so well. So I've always, you asked about planning. My planning is, I'm going to go as light as I can, equipment wise, but I'm going to take, a week's worth of food, knowing that I could get down in 5 days, but it might take 10. And if it's going slow, I'll start rationing my food. I don't do my food in like food bags. Like at home, I don't reach into my pantry and go, oh, here's Tuesday's
Mm,
lunch,
Monday,
and
yes.
like I don't do day bags of food. I just kind of know that 2 pounds of food on average works out for me. And when I'm floating, maybe I only need to eat 1 pound of food a day because I'm not burning a lot of calories, but I'm paddling hard down, tidewater in the rain. I'm going to want to
Mm.
eat 3 pounds of food a day because I'm burning so many calories. So I learned to kind of, I learned to ration the food as I go, only eat as much as I need so I have enough food for the trip. Um, but I try not to take much gear, like I've tried to scrape all, like you said earlier, make everything do double duty, leave things at
Mm.
home that I don't necessarily need or that I might just take because I'm nervous or insecure about something. Um,
Just
and
think about gear
hopefully,
then, because obviously, people know brands that you would take for trekking or brands that you would take for kayaking and things like that. There's obviously those sort of brands that are very much affiliated to a specific method of transport or sport. In terms of the pack rafting world, was this stuff when you were doing these early trips that you were sort of pioneering the gear as well, or was there off the shelf things that you might use for kayaking that also doubled up for this sort of pack raft adventure?
right. I've never been very good at making gear. Like I'd rather just take what I find and make it work for me.
Mm.
And I did find I knew what I wanted and I would look for things off the shelf that would work. So for example, there was a company called Cascade Designs. They made inflatable air mattresses. They were first people to make these lightweight inflatable air mattresses. Um, and at one point, they started making sleeping bags and even packs. And they had what they called a day pack. And it was just a harness, like it had shoulder straps and a sternum strap and a waist belt. And then the back part, the pack part, was just a harness that held a dry bag. So it
Okay.
just had
Yeah.
lateral straps. It was like a big diaper that came up and closed over the top. So it was very light. It weighed 2 pounds without the dry bag. And they called it a day pack. And I used that they gave us a bunch of those. And I saw those. I thought this is going to be perfect pack for me, because it was very versatile and very light. And I ended
Mm.
up using that style of pack for, like 15 years.
Wow.
And I liked it and I could carry a lot of weight in it. Like the same style pack, again, this weighed 2 pounds. I did this walk where we left with all the food we would need to walk as far as we could with just one bag of food. Like no food caches, no help along the way, no foraging or eating fish or shooting
Mm.
animals. And so I started with two other guys, and my pack weighed 59 pounds, and that was full of like food and sleeping gear and stuff. But 59 isn't that heavy when you consider like we walked 625 miles, so we carried enough
Jeez.
food for 625 miles, and there were no trails. So like this was all off trail in northern Alaska. And so
Wow.
that pack style, which is just a dry bag holder, basically, just straps to hold the dry bag, that's the kind of packs we used. And we had to swim rivers with it. So the dry bag
Mm,
kept everything dry when we swam a river. And and then we could use the dry bag to, lay out and sleep on because our tent didn't have any floor. So everything had multiple functions. And the pack itself, you could unsnap it and roll it out, and we also slept on that. That was part of the insulation because our foam pads were only
gotcha.
like,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
like that.
What were you paddling in? Is this sort of wet? Because Franklin's obviously pretty cool down there. I mean, I don't know if you remember the time of year that you were down there, but you're in a wetsuit from the majority of the time when you're on the water.
The first time I did it in 2001, I just wore rain gear. I didn't even have a dry
Mm,
suit or a wetsuit.
okay.
But when I went down in 2010 or 11, I think it might have been 2000, like January 2011, I did it with my son and a guy named Bill Hatcher, and we published an article in, I think, Australia Geographic. And that time, we had dry suits, like a dry suit.
Hmm.
I'm fully on board with the dry suit. Like, um,
Yeah.
you know, I,
Absolutely.
I,
Creature comforts definitely bring their perks, don't they?
yeah, and it's actually, I think in Alaska, it's more about survival. I did a lot of pack rafting in the 80s and even in the 90s without a dry suit. And I would still do it today, just wearing rain gear, if it's like class one or two. And the new boats have spray skirts. So if you put the spray skirt on, it keeps you a lot warmer and drier. And if I'm not going
Yes.
to swim, I'm going to be okay. But the Franklin, there's a high probability of swimming, and there's big waves crashing over you, and a dry suit and a helmet and a throw bag and a partner. Those are absolute necessities. And I didn't have any of those on the first trip. I don't,
Mm.
I'm not, I'm sure I had a helmet, but I think all I had was a helmet and a PFD. I know I didn't have a partner, and I know I didn't have a dry suit or a wetsuit.
Sounds like the ethos of adventure. I mean, not to downgrade the sort of second trip at all, because obviously you got your son with you, and safety becomes more of a priority because of your responsibility. But you sort of went into it very much blind, but also with that sheer overwhelming feeling that adventure is happening right here, right now, because the planning can only happen to a certain degree. Everything is done. You're doing is almost from a pioneering perspective, from the boat, the gear, the river itself. You said you saw no one on the entire trip.
Yeah, nobody, right. Until the
Wow.
end. Like I paddled downstream, and there was like a ferry boat that comes up, in the tide waters,
Hmm.
and it pulls aside so the tourists can go like on a nature walk. And I got to there, and then I got on that boat, and it went into Strawn, I think it is.
Were the stories only captured in your mind, or were you creating and capturing content with photography or video or writing a journal? How were you sort of capturing everything for your own mind or sharing stories later?
Yeah, great question. Well, on that trip in 2002, I don't think I had anything. I maybe wrote a few notes in that little waterproof book,
Mm,
with a indelible pen, but I don't think I wrote anything down. And I was in between cameras then. Like I was a film camera photographer.
yeah.
But once things went digital, I didn't embrace it right away. And I didn't embrace the digital world till I got like these little small um, op, Optio. No, what was it called? I can't remember what a Pentax Optio is. A little waterproof
Hmm.
camera, and
Yeah.
I used it for video. And I took a little Gorilla Pod and I screwed it on the
Yes.
bottom. I
Yeah.
hold it in my teeth,
I would like that. Yeah.
yeah,
I still do that on
and
kayaking trips now with a foam handle in my mouth and paddling like that for that POV perspective.
right, it's great. And I could do it as long as it wasn't too tricky to paddle, But I think in the early stages of, whitewater pack rafting, I associate those little cameras with that as part of what
Mm.
made it, and we would do these trips and put it to music and put it on YouTube. And, there'd be a couple thousand views, and, they were probably all people we knew. But it was a great way to kind of share what we were doing. And I think that, things spread a little more quickly that way than they had when all you could do is take film photos and then hope you could sell them to a magazine or something or get them published. I think the way things are today, things can spread much faster through the media.
They do. What's your thoughts on it? Because for me, I mean, you coming back and being able to talk and conjure up images of dreamy conversation about the time, the place, the location, the challenge. That to me is so much more beautiful to sit on a stage or listen to you talk now or read a blog. Social media is wonderful at storytelling, but it also almost degrades the moment because you feel like you've been there. You feel like you've already done it. If you've seen the video and you've seen the reel, why go there yourself? Your storytelling excites me, and I want to go and do that without the capturing content process that it seems to involve these days.
Sure. When I was a photographer and I finally set my camera down, it was freeing. I felt
Mm,
liberated because often the camera would get in between me and the experience. And I mean, with a film camera, at least you're looking through, you're seeing the real light. But with a digital
yeah,
camera, you're often seeing something that's passed through the machine before it gets to you. It's not just going through glass, it's
yeah.
going through sensors and stuff. And I just found like oftentimes if something was really fantastic, I didn't just enjoy it. I thought, I gotta get it, I gotta get it. And then I didn't get it, and I felt disappointed. And
Mm.
so once I put the camera down and put it away, I could just really relax and enjoy the moment and not feel like I had to capture it and share it with anybody.
Mm.
And that's
And there's
been real,
expectation for. Sorry, go on.
yeah, no, that's been real liberating. I was just gonna say.
I think there's expectation now with people having to deliver things for social media, whether it's for gear partners or sponsors or anything, that they're there producing it to keep the sponsors and the partners happy, as opposed to actually living in the moment. And when you do get that chance to down tools and actually sit and realize I'm only capturing it for my own brain, that's that moment of total disconnection that adventure can really offer.
Yeah. No, I still, I took on that big long walk, I took a camera and I'm glad I did, because I had those photos and it was a digital camera. And I'm happy that I took pictures of my kids and my wife when we were all young. I mean,
Mm,
that was
yes.
really marvelous to look back at that. And there's pictures I wish that I'd taken. But yeah, I think it's a balance, isn't it? Between, you don't want to just give it all up because it's nice to have something to trigger your memories. But you
Mm,
don't want to make it all about that and try to be like a pro when you're not going to be a pro. Like sometimes we get caught up in trying to do what the pros are doing, and it just gets in the way of our own
yes.
experience.
You mentioned you went there in 2001 and you went back with your son a number of years later. What were the differences? I mean, obviously you've got a person there to share the story with, but did the river feel different? Did you feel disappointed? Because sometimes you sort of see these journeys that people take and then go do 10 or 20 years later, and they never seem to be as fulfilling as the original journey. What was your comparisons?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah. Well, on the first trip, the first couple days I was going down, I thought, this is fantastic. This is the best whitewater. This is the best pack rafting river I've ever been on. When I get back home, I'm going to invite all my pack rafting friends to come join me, and we're going to come back and do it. And then a couple days in, I was like, how the hell do I get out of here? Like I think there's a trail that I can hike out for 3 days, past this or that mountain. And I'm like, I was starting to feel trapped because the water level was coming up. I had a bad swim or two. It was cold, wet. I was miserable. I was camping in the leeches, and I kind of wanted
Mm,
to get out, but I couldn't get out. And then I was thinking, no, I don't think anybody should come do this river. And then the weather got good again, and I got around the bad rapids and got into the super fun rapids and had an incredible time. And when I came back, almost 10 years later, I guess, with my son and somebody else, it was a whole new experience. My son was a better paddler. He was a teenager then. He was a better paddler than I was when I'd first gone down. He had more experience and having a good friend of mine who I'd done a lot of expeditions with, Bill Hatcher, along. It was a more relaxing and enjoyable trip. We were more comfortable, but I wasn't disappointed in the water at all. The water was, if
mm,
anything, it was more exciting because I wasn't terrified of it, and I could run a lot of rapids that I didn't want to run but had to run before. I was much more
yeah.
experienced. So yeah, each time it was great. I have had some friends who've gone there and the water level was low, and I was disappointed they came back not feeling as fulfilled as
Mm,
I had. But
mm,
both of those trips, the one fulfilled that kind of, true, adventurer spirit, like, it's all you. and you're going into the unknown with some sketchy details. I knew people had done this river multiple times, and I even had a guidebook, but nobody had done it with a boat like this, and I was all
Mm,
alone. I'd never been there. And then later on, coming back, it was equally fulfilling, but I was there sort of as a father and a friend, and we got to share it, and we found like some big paddles, and it was both of them were wonderful experiences. And if you ask me, did it feel like the same river twice? I'd have to say no. They felt like very different
mm,
rivers. Like
interesting.
even some of the rapids I remembered, but they were like some of the ones at like Newlands Cascade, some of the ones on the lower on the Pig's Trough. Those are very memorable. But it felt very different. Like there's a place in my local state park. We live next to a state park that's huge. It's about half the size of Yellowstone National Park, and it comes up and butts next to our city. And there's one valley that I've hiked in. It's my favorite valley in the park, and I've hiked there all the, for 30 years. And they put a trail in. And when I walk on the trail, it doesn't feel like the same valley. It has the same views, but I'm walking on the trail, and I'm not feeling that valley the way I did when there's no trail. When there's no trail,
Mm,
I can feel the sticker bushes, I can feel the rocks, I can feel the slope, I can feel like the edginess, and I have to decide where to go. I'm much more engaged with the landscape without
yeah,
a trail. My brain is
yeah,
really like tied into it. And once the trail is there, I'm not as engaged with it, even though it's the same place, And I want
interesting.
to say that I love the valley with the trail, but it's a different experience with the trail
Yeah,
than it was
yeah.
without the trail. And I can't just like get off the trail and walk along get off the trail and walk without the trail when I can see the trail over there. That feels contrived and silly.
It's-
Um, yeah, but I guess that I like both experiences, and but it's the same place, but it feels very different, and that's how the Franklin was on those two trips.
That's I really appreciate that. It's a great answer. I want to go back to some of the places that I've been to individually, personally, as my own adventurer and traveler. But then when I take clients back there, I've got that feeling through their eyes for the first time to
Yeah.
see their wow. It doesn't as maybe the wow factor doesn't go as deep for you as an individual, but taking someone else there to share that moment, it's seeing it through their eyes and seeing the fascination or the danger or whatever they're going to face from, suffer from or enjoy. Taking your son, this is an interesting one I was thinking about a minute ago. I've got an 8-year-old boy called Atlas. I take him on some of my adventures. With your son, was it something that he naturally gravitated to, or did you feel like the pushy dad sometimes dragging them along against their own will? What was his acceptance of your world and joining it like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, listen, Ben, like from the get-go, I wanted to have, because I wanted my son, I wanted to be a good father to my son. And what that meant is I wanted him to, I wanted us to do things together, and I wanted him to do them with me,
Mm,
like I didn't really like doing stuff with my father. My father didn't really know how to be a father. It was sort of all about him. And I didn't want to make it all about me. What I wanted to do is sort of share things that I enjoyed with his name was he gave us he was born Cody Roman Dial, but when he was
mm,
6, I took him on a hike to when he was 6. You said your son is 8, is that what you said?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, we'd done a bunch of trips together, but they'd been like base camp trips, where you'd like camp at the beach and go poke around in the tide pools and look at the animals there. Or we were in the jungle and we like stayed in a hut and we would go walk around on jungle trails and look at animals because it seems like all kids, especially boys, and I don't mean to be sexist, but I think there is something to that, like kind of like animals and plants. That we're kind of born hardwired to be interested in those things.
Yeah.
And I just encouraged him to look into those things, and then I would share them with him. But I still wanted to do something with more movement, than just
Hmm.
that, because I like to wander around, but I didn't want to burn him out. I didn't want him to not want to
Yeah.
do things with me. And so when he was 6, I decided it was time to go on a week-long backpacking trip, but I wasn't going to make
Wow.
him carry anything, and I was going to carry everything because I wanted him to be as comfortable as possible. So I brought
Mm.
his favorite book, that we were reading at the time. It was Charlotte's Web, and I
Great.
and I brought like rain gear and a one-piece suit, and I picked a place. It didn't have any trails. It was an island in the Aleutians, which are the islands that stretch out to the southwest of Alaska towards Russia,
Yeah.
a big, long, 1,000-mile chain of islands.
Wow.
And I'd found one island on a map that had a geyser basin, like Yellowstone has geysers, and New Zealand, I
Mhm.
think, has some geysers. And I wanted to see that. And I thought they were little miniature geysers, and I thought he would be interested in that. And there were no bears, and there weren't any really big rivers that we had to worry about. So it seemed like a safe place to go. And so we went out there, and we landed. Like there's only two communities. There's a little Aleut village on one end, and there was this family of three, a husband, a wife, and their adult son living on the other end of the island. And we hitchhiked. I kind of hitchhiked an airplane ride that had a bunch of Japanese mountaineers and a film crew that was flying to a couple Aleutian islands out, and somehow I managed to get us a ride to this island called Umnak, and we landed at where this family was of the father and the mother and their adult son, and the guy looked at us when we got off the plane like, "What are you doing here?" Because here is this like father with a 6-year-old boy on this rocky island that has no trees, and it's way out in the middle of nowhere. And he asked me what my name was, and I told him, I'm Roman. And he bends down. He says, "Well, what's your name, little guy?" And he looks at my son. He goes, my son, who had up to that point gone by Cody, goes, "I'm Roman too." And I was like, wow, like, what is that exactly? I didn't know if he meant I'm Roman also, if I'm Roman number two. And
Mm.
so ever after that, he went by Roman, for the rest of his life. You
Wow.
know, and so I thought that was a good indicator that he wanted to be there. Do you know what I mean? And
Mm.
he wanted
Yeah.
to do what we were going to do. And so while we were on this trip, and this, I'm trying to answer your question really, like, I never really pushed him. You know what I mean? Like, if he
Yeah.
said, Dad, my feet hurt. Would you carry me? I'd be like, yeah, sure, Rome. And I'd pick him up and put him on top of my, kind of on the pack on my shoulders and carry him. And then I'd say, hey, Roman, my feet are hurt. My back hurts. Do you mind walking now? He'd be like, no,
Yeah.
Dad, we'll walk. And then, if he was feeling like sometimes, if it was rough going over there was one real rocky dry, not dry, but a rocky stretch of lava, kind of like this lava, and it was pretty rugged. And so even without a pack, it wasn't that good. And I could tell he was not having that great of a time. And we started. I can't remember now. It's awful. I can't remember. I have to look back in my notes. But I think we started. I said, well, we started role playing that we were on a planet, and he was like, I called him Captain, and he goes, I said, well, where are we, Captain? He goes, oh, we're on a planet in space, and
I love it.
he says, well, who are you? I said, oh, I'm your sergeant. I'm a soldier who'll do whatever you need to do. And so for like an hour or 2 hours, we just role played in this really rugged terrain to kind of make it go by easier. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Gamifying the moments and trying to take off because endurance to a child is just numbing, boring, and make them break very quickly. To be able to gamify moments, to get to this corner, to do this, to find this branch, to find a red leaf, they're moments that I feel you're echoing in my journey taking Atlas to New Zealand when he was 4 years old. Exactly the same sort of thing. I had the backpack. I carried him. I didn't want him to feel pain. I didn't want him to feel like he was tired of it. Someone said to me, it's a great quote. You can never make a child love a new activity on its first adventure. You can always make them hate it. And I think it's so
Yeah,
true.
that is, wow. Yeah, I tried not to learn that the hard way, but here's the bummer is our daughter, she was 2 years younger than he. And so I thought we were just crawling along, doing something at a kid pace, but the difference between like a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old or an 8-year-old and a
Mm,
6-year-old is monstrous. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
And so he turned out to be an outdoor kid, but she didn't, because like you said, it's hard to make her love it, but it was real easy to make her hate it. And so
Mm,
she always felt like she was struggling to keep up. And so it was kind of my fault that I wasn't paying closer attention to what was happening with her. But yeah, that's a
So
great book.
the suggestion of going to Tasmania with Cody for your second, his first adventure, did that come from him wanting to go and do something that you'd done, or was it you suggesting the idea?
Great. Well, at that time, he was sort of my main pack rafting partner. So he, when I think the first time I took him whitewater pack rafting on this little, kind of a little class four creek, he must have been like 13 or 14. And I was with an adult friend also. And it's just a little steep little creek with fun rapids. It's relatively safe. You know, if you, you're not going to get drowned. You'd have to have
Hmm.
some really bad luck. It's technical, but really low volume and shallow.
Yeah.
And and it was one of the first times that Alpaca had made a cover for the boat to keep the water out. And we'd gone without him. I was afraid to use him because I didn't know. And I thought, okay, I think let's try him out. We're in a good spot. We put him on, and he got on. And my friend's eyes were like big, like, huge, like, whoa, what are we doing here? This is like, he was like all freaked out. And Roman's like, Dad, this is the most fun I've ever had in my life. And so he and I did a lot of pack rafting together.
Yeah.
And then when it came time, he'd been to Australia a couple of times before that, like out to the West Coast when he was like 4. And then when we went up to the Iron Ranges Park and like northern Queensland and where else did we go? Like up around Cairns. Oh yeah, Lizard Island. He was, gosh, he must have been 9 or 10. Um, and he'd hiked the overland trail. So he'd been to Australia 3 times, I
Yeah,
guess,
and knew it
beforehand.
well. Yeah, knew it
Yeah.
enough.
And then so it was Australia and it was pack rafting and he was like a teenager and he had testosterone going, so he was ready for this. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
once you're a boy, once you go from boy to young man and your testosterone starts flowing, doing these kinds of things is great. And you haven't kind of butted heads with your dad yet. Your dad is still kind of like, hey,
In
um,
hero territory. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So he loved it, and it was really fun for him. And my friend Bill had watched him grow up, and so it was a great trip, and he liked it. But it was my idea to go do it, but he was all
Mm.
about it. Mhm.
Ready to. I love the. It's really interesting the insights. You're living that life and that journey, and I'm coming up to that. So it's really interesting just to know what it should feel like for me, and when to pull them more towards you, and when to let them have their own mind about what they want to do. Atlas is certainly like that. We've done a couple of trips into Nepal, into the Himalayas, and I took him there when he was 5, and then again in November of this year when he's 8. And the difference between that age range between 5 and 8, you are a carrying medium when he's 5 years old, and you are then the person that holds the hand and helps them get over the next crest or the next hill when they get to 8 years old. So I'm looking forward to that next chapter.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I got to the point where, I would ask, where do you want to go and what do you want to do? And he would have ideas. And that's a really satisfying place to be is when
Mm.
you can kind of start letting them lead.
Let's go back to the banks of the river and let's look at what an average day is like for a pack raft on something like an Alaskan river or something down on the Franklin. When you're sort of looking for your camp overnight, you've settled your bed down, you put up a top, maybe you wake up that next morning. What does the next day look like, and how do you plan your average days?
Sure. Well, usually, um, our stuff is wet, from the day before. The dry suit is wet, and
Mm.
usually, in Tasmania, I like to have a tent that has a floor to keep the leeches out. Now
Yeah.
in Alaska, we don't need a floor, so we just have a tent that has no floor, which is nice because you can just have all your gear, your wet gear piled in a corner, inside the tent, kind of dry. And then I'm waking up on a foam pad with a air mattress on top and my sleeping bag and my partners are next to me and we'll just fire up the stove and have a hot drink and coffee so that we can get, warm before we get out of the bag. And
Mm.
and once we're like warm and we've eaten, we'll put on those damp clothes. And
Ooh, that's the worst bit of the day, isn't it?
it is, well, yeah, the wet socks if you got to put those on. Yeah, and but we're kind of warm and ready for it.
Mm.
And if it's not raining, it's no big deal. And then we'll break camp, pack up, get in the river, and go. And if it's raining, we might be a little more leisurely and might have to, maybe even get out of the tent, make a fire, or wait around. but usually that's kind of how it goes. I like to set up my tent and not really get out. And once I go into the tent, I don't want to get out of it until it's time to leave,
Yeah.
And so I usually, it depends on how, if we're trying to make time, we'll have a 12-hour camp and a 12-hour day of travel.
Yeah.
And otherwise it's maybe 14 hours of camp, and 10 hours of travel, or even 16 hours, and
Mm,
where the camp time might include campfires. I like to have a campfire at the end of the day, because we paddle all day. We stop now and then to get out, maybe hike around. But in Alaska, when we do a pack rafting trip, we don't really do hiking side trips, for
mm,
two reasons. One, we're going to hike over a mountain range to float another river, and we don't need to do a bunch of hiking because we're going to be doing a lot of it. And two, I don't like to leave my stuff in Alaska for fear of bears getting into it.
yeah.
Like I don't
Yeah.
mind cooking in my tent and sleeping with my food because, the bears in the wilderness, if there's no trails, the bears are pretty unfamiliar. They're not super familiar with people, and they don't steal people's food. They're still
Gotcha.
kind of leery of you, and they don't know that you've got food in there. It might smell good, but they're kind of nervous. But if you leave your tent and leave your stuff, and you're not there to like scare them away, and just being there scares them, then they're going to get into it. It's
Mm,
like a dog. I treat bears, I think of bears like dogs. So like if you put your hamburger on the floor and you leave your house, your dog will probably eat it. But if you're there, you can tell the dog just be in there, the dog won't eat it. And so bears are
mm,
kind of the same way. You just have to, um, so that I don't like to go on side hikes. I mean, in the Grand Canyon, I'll go on side hikes. There's no bears. But in Alaska, we get up, we load up the boats, these new boats that have the zippers, and you put all your stuff on the inside, so you always have a dry camp. That's amazing. We used to have to
wow.
strap our gear on the front of the boat, and
Well,
they were,
that's where I was going to next. In a way, was that how do you secure and keep that stuff dry? So, talk to me about these new boat things. I only use a very basic alpaca boat, but you're talking about
yeah.
sort of dry sections now.
Oh yeah, what they did one time, this the former Sherry Tingey, the woman who started alpaca, and this guy Forrest McCarthy, and my son and I, we were driving from Arizona to Mexico to go pack rafting, and we were all caffeinated up trying to come up with new ideas. And Forrest came up with this idea.
Brilliant.
He was all like, he's all jacked up, his eyes are bulging. He goes, what about if we put like a dry suit zipper on the alpaca raft, and then that would allow us to get into the raft, and we could store all of our things inside the raft, so the raft would be like a giant dry bag. And a few years later, she actually found the kind of zippers that would work. And what made that work is in the early days, the boats were stubby, short.
Yeah.
They didn't have a very long stern, and so the boats would kind of pivot every time you paddled. It would turn and
Hmm.
twist. So the the stern got longer and longer, and then Sherry realized the stern was long enough she could put a zipper there and have that
Right.
entry into the. It's just one big air chamber. There's only one chamber. It's one tube. So in the morning, your boat is flat, and you unzip it, make sure that you don't get any grit or sand in it, and you put,
Mhm.
all your dry things like your sleeping bag. And then if your tent's wet, you might want to think about like putting your tent inside of a dry bag so that the inside of the tube doesn't get wet. So you just pack everything up very carefully so you don't get the inside. If you get the inside of the tubes wet, all your gear is going to be wet,
Yeah, of course.
because it's like a giant dry bag. And then the other thing is that it's the boat's very lightweight fabric. It's durable, but you doesn't mean you can abuse it. Like our skin is durable, but it doesn't mean you should abuse it.
Hmm.
And especially our skin even heals. We still don't want to abuse it. And so you don't want to abuse the boat. So you want to be careful with anything hard like fuel cans or fuel bottles. You want to pad those because if you put those inside the boat and you hit a rock, the
Yeah, that's a
fabric
weak
gets
spot
cut.
straight away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it'll get
So
a
these are
little
more,
burly.
I suppose that so the pack raft has gone from being this sort of a bit of a round tub that is just to keep you afloat to being more expedition based where you've got gear storage. How are alpaca or how are other boats evolving? Are you seeing much progress and change as sort of technologies and materials come into onto the
Uh,
market?
yeah, I don't know if the materials have changed that much. I mean, it's still like some sort of like a fabric with a coating on it, like
Mm.
nylon. And there and what happens is, yes, they've changed a lot, from the first boat I had in 1982 or 83, really, I bought it, was basically the same design as an Air Force survival boat that they had in, Korean or World War II airplanes, so that when they crashed in the
Yeah.
ocean, they had something to get into. So it was just a survival raft. It was just, like you said, a round tub. And Alpaca took the round tub and gave it bigger tubes and made it have a more upturned bow, so less water would come in when you were
Yeah.
floating down moving water. Because the American safety raft and the Sherpa raft was, the next one. Those were for flat water survival, basically. But we were now on moving rivers, and then water was going into the boat. So like version 2.0 of the Alpaca had a spray skirt. Version 3.0 had like long stern with a zipper. And Alpaca 4.0, like they have a lot of them, they have one called the Valkyrie, and it's basically a whitewater kayak with a long stern and a long um, bow and a zipper and an inflatable floor and thigh straps, and you can even put like a kayaking type spray skirt
Wow.
onto the
So
deck.
you've actually, so a lot more functionality to be able to use it for those sort of multi days and keep things secure and keep things safe.
Yeah, but you can't really carry. I mean, people do like listen to this, and I'm like they've all gone beyond me. I'm just an old man now telling stories. But the guys today, they'll put skis, like alpine, like backcountry skis, inside the
Yeah. Yeah.
tubes, and they'll float down a river, a class 4 river with their skis inside the tubes and all their camping gear. Then they'll get out and hike up till they're to the snow line, ski across the mountains, ski down to another class 4 river, put away their stuff, and link several rivers with these ski trips.
Wow.
And they're
Wow.
running.
That total multidiscipline.
Yep. But and we put skis on our boats, but we weren't running class 4 and class 5 whitewater. We were just, duckying down, class 2 glacial rivers, shivering in our rain gear. But there's
Every
a lot of
different
neat.
horses for different courses, and those boys and those girls that love different things. It's like the the bike rafting ones, really, isn't it? Where they take those. Right, let's go. We're going to sort of go into the canopy stuff now, just very briefly on
Sure.
this one. I think we've got a good bit of that one. Um, so we've done a lot of conversations about the water world. You have sort of converted that, maybe from some of your study and your university course that you did that took you up into the canopies, the biological world, the vertical world. You spent a lot of time moving through the treetops. Australia's got some of probably the most iconic land and forests on Earth. Talk to me about canopy trekking and how you brought that into Australia.
Sure. Well, when I was working on my PhD, I spent a lot of time alone collecting data in the top of these rainforest canopies in the Caribbean on the island of Puerto Rico. So I'd go up there during the
Mm,
day. I had these experiments. I'd collect data. I was by myself. I had time to think when it rained.
mm.
And and I was up in the tree and thinking about how we had accessed some of these trees, and I thought, wow, the techniques we use to access some of these trees, you could actually use those to link trees together. I wonder how far you could go. And and when I came back to Stanford and I saw the other students there, I told them that I had this idea to go from tree to tree and travel and camp up there, without coming to
Love
the
it.
ground, taking everything we
Yeah,
needed, kind of like, like alpine style tree climbing, I guess.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and they thought, well, they already knew I was kind of wacky. I'd already done some stuff that they thought was oddball, but they entertained my oddities. And one guy went and the two people went and talked to this other tree scientist and told him about my idea, and he got all excited about it. And a few years later, we met, and he had heard the idea, and we hadn't even talked, and he'd heard the idea, and one of his students, had been indulging in some mind-altering drug and came up with this idea of how you could go from tree to tree. And the way you would be able to do it is if you took what all the arborists, the tree people use, it's called a throw
Yeah,
bag, and it's
yeah.
like full of like, I don't know, BBs or lead pellets, and it has a skinny string, and you throw it into a tree over a branch, and it drops to the ground, and you tie your tree rope on that, and you pull that over the branch, and that's how you get into the tree. And this
Such a
guy said,
unique idea.
yeah, and this guy said, why don't we climb a tree and take that throw bag and throw it into another tree? Okay, so you're in two trees, and you throw the
Yeah.
throw bag from one to the other. And then from this tree, uh, we'll use a crossbow arrow that has like these reverse tines, and the crossbow arrow will shoot from a little. At first, it was a little pistol grip crossbow, and 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 then it'll be attached. The arrow will be attached to a fishing line that goes to a fishing reel, and so you shoot it and you tangle up that throw bag is hanging over a branch, and you tangle up that line with your magic missile, he called it, and then you just
Mm.
pull that in and tie your climbing rope on and pull the climbing rope back over the branch with the P cord, and then do a Tyrolean traverse from one tree to the other.
Right. So you're literally swinging across and going between the trees like that. Rather than one big giant leap of faith with a swing on it, you're traversing across between them at the same sort of height.
Yep, and so it's kind of sketchy because you have to trust that branch, and then there's all these
Mm.
technical bits like how do you get you've got to have somebody in the first tree to like loosen the knot, loosen the rope so you can pull the knot over to your tree, and they'll
Yeah.
come over to
Yeah.
you. It's kind of like sideways rappelling. And but they're Tyrolean traverses, and so we did that like on this like 100-meter tree or 300-foot tall tree, two redwood trees. We tried it out as proof of concept, and then we did a 3-day camping trip going from tree to tree in the giant sequoias. And
How
then
many? I mean, you must up the rate, the speed that you're going across. So it's not about setting a fastest known time for it. It's about enjoying the moment in that canopy and then moving to the next. So you're traversing a fair few trees over that number of
yeah,
days.
no, it's hard. It's slow. It's like aid climbing. It's like,
Yeah.
I think when Warren Harding climbed El Cap, El Capitan in Yosemite, it took him like a month or multiple months to get up, the whole summer.
Mm.
It's like this slow aid climbing, a lot of rope handling. And now people climb it in, what, 2 hours or something
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Ridiculous time.
Yeah. So it went from a month to 2 hours. Um, and it did that pretty quickly. But so we don't go very fast. Like when we did it in like the redwoods for one day, we did it in the sequoias for 3 days. I wrote a grant proposal to National Geographic to go to Borneo and Australia. We went to Australia to these big mountain ash trees down by Melbourne, and
Yeah.
we went up for a week. We spent 7 days. We carried all of our water, all of our food. We even had poop tubes like you would on a
Hmm.
big wall. We had too many people, like we had 4 people. We camped up there, and we only went in a week 200 meters. Okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. What do you notice differently from being up in the canopy and that you would on the trail? I mean, it's significantly, obviously, you're not in contact with the ground, but what do you what's the vibe and the feel like when you're up in the sky?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, my feeling is when I'm up in the crown of the trees at the tip tops and you're looking over the tops of the trees, it's not that exciting to me. It's sort of like
Mm.
you could just be on looking over bushes that were head high and you're standing on the ground. But when you get down to like where the crown starts up, like there's a tree trunk and then the
Yeah.
crown opens up, right about here is unbelievably beautiful. Like when you're in the lower crown right here, like hanging out on the branches, it's real comfortable. It feels like you're doing something that you were evolved to do. It's almost like your eyes, us as arboreal primates, like this opposable thumb,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
to grab branches and this binocular vision, these two eyes in the front, you can get depth perception, and that's all from being like an arboreal animal. And so here you are, kind of in the most awesome place in the forest is when you're like above the ground, but you're not up in the bushes. You're kind of in this place where it just opens up in this wonderful three-dimensional view. And I don't know, it feels like you really belong there. And I've never been any place that I was as content just to sit there and do nothing and kind of look around and watch birds. And one time I was a rope in this Wallaby Creek area while I was doing some research. I had a Tyrolean line, but I wasn't canopy trekking. I was just doing science. So I had a horizontal line and a vertical line, and the vertical line was in free space, and then it hit a branch. And I thought, oh, good, I'm on this. I was jumaring up, collecting data the whole way. And I got to the branch. I was like, oh yeah, I get to stand here. And I stuck my foot in a hole in the branch, and this brown creature crawled out, like the size of a big cat or a small dog, crawled out, walked across my foot, jumped off my foot, and then opened up its wings. It was one of these greater gliders. It
Ah,
tucked its like
yeah.
its
Yeah.
little paws under here, and I looked below. It looked like a shovel flying down with this long brown tail, and it zigzagged around trees and went really far, and then like landed on another tree and disappeared, climbed up.
What an amazing moment! Something that people just aren't privy to. There is a great attraction with staying in tree houses. There's something beautiful and magical and almost children's story like about being elevated off the ground in this sort of privileged position to be, which you've made not just your office but a sort of a home for a number of days. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I do love being in trees, and I would still climb trees, but it's we don't have the tree climbing up here isn't that good. You know, there's a lot of other things that are great, and I just
Mm,
was it's too expensive just to go be like a hobby climber somewhere, far away when I have the great state of Alaska to do all these other amazing
yes. Yeah,
experiences.
you've explored a fair bit of Australia. It sounds like you've sort of done a lot of different landscapes and stuff. If you're going to recommend to someone from Alaska going to Australia for their first time, what are the landscapes you'd steer them towards?
Right, great question. Well, like I love Tasmania. My wife doesn't really like Tasmania. She's, Alaskan also, and she really likes, you know, Queensland because it's like the tropics, and then you
Mm,
from the coast, the ocean, the Great Barrier Reef, to the rainforest of Mount Bartle Frere, and then you go a little bit farther and you're in the outback. So it just has a lot packed into
mm.
that little narrow.
It's David Attenborough that describes it as the place he likes to go on a holiday because you've got World Heritage areas butted up against each other. So, one of the greatest people that I've ever learned from, if he describes it as that, I feel like I'm sitting in a pretty privileged part of the country in the world right now.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I think and like it's got really neat creatures up on the northern part. It has sort of like New Guinea animals and plants and little islands of, jungle. Yeah, I
Mm.
love Queensland. I've been there, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. I guess that's my favorite part. I like Kakadu, but not quite as much. And I like the Bungle Bungles the one time I went there, but
Still haven't
um,
been there. Yes, it resonates with me that one because it's on the list of still haven't got tos. In a way, it's funny. It takes someone from overseas to come and explore somewhere in Australia to expose it to other Australians. So, what do you think? What can Australians take from your adventures within Australia?
they should get themselves a pack raft. When I went to the Bungle Bungles, I floated the Ord River down to the
Oh,
park because it was the wet season, so the park was closed. It didn't
right.
have nobody. You couldn't get in there, and that was one of the all-time greatest experiences. And my wife was nervous and didn't want to go, so she stayed at the road. But she saw those beautiful little Gouldian and finches. She
Mm.
watched those every day, all day. But I, pack rafted down underneath this giant, I'm sure, I don't know what kind of tree, maybe like a fig tree, but it was packed with bats, like, I don't know, a million bats. And there were crocodiles swimming around because some of the bats were like sick and falling into the water.
Wow.
And then I camped downstream in it was more like a forest than just a few trees. It just erupted in bats and they flew past for like, it felt like half an hour. Um,
Wow.
and then I got into the Bungle Bungles, and was nobody there. So I wandered around and checked it out. And I was walking on this road heading back. I was going to take the dirt track back to the highway, which was another like kind of uncomfortable experience. But I ran into a 3 meter king brown snake there, and I was like nervous about it. And it was kind of coming. It was coming. It was coming the way I wanted to walk down the road, but it was in the way. So I thought I
Hmm.
would throw some rocks at it. And I threw
Yeah.
these rocks at it, and then it turned around and came towards me, and I was like, holy crap, I've never had a giant snake come towards me. And it moved relatively quickly. And then I kind of had to like run away from a snake. I'd never had to run
Yeah.
from a snake before. I'm sure it wasn't going to get me, but a big,
They're pretty renowned. They're pretty renowned for that attacking mindset that they've got, rather than just scooping away like we get the carpet pythons often here in Currumbin where we are that just get on the road and as soon as you shoo them away, they sort of disappear off into the undergrowth. But the king browns are renowned for being pretty attacking. So I think you probably did the best thing and turned and scarpered.
Yeah. And then, I walked on this road and it was so hot. It was like 45 Celsius. And it was so hot during the day that even carrying an umbrella in the shade wasn't enough. I had to walk at night. And luckily there was a moon because I didn't have much headlamp left. And my feet, the ground was so hot that I had to walk in my Crocs. And there were fires going on. So it was creepy as all get out. And at one point I heard a didgeridoo, like it was one of the
Whoa.
creepiest moment I've ever had.
Whoa.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like I was about 20 kilometers from the nearest road, like halfway from the park to the highway, and I heard this, and there were these fires going all around, and I'd been chased by a bull that like roared. It didn't even bellow. It was some kind of feral bull, with big hump and horns, and it didn't go, "Roar," it went "Roar," like that. It was a freaky experience, like between the king brown and the bellowing bull and the didgeridoo at
Yeah,
night.
it's about as iconically Australian as you could hope for in a way. If you were going to craft up the storyline for a movie, this is part of the intro.
Yeah, yeah, it was amazing. So I would get a pack raft if even though there's not a lot of water in Australia,
Hmm.
there is a wet season, and usually people don't like to go places in the wet season, but I actually think the wet season is the good time to go
Yeah.
because, it's there's water and it's cool in the when the and it might rain, but the beautiful mornings, and then um it's kind of it's like the tropics, but better, because it's Australia. And then there's Tasmania. You can, with the new boats, Alpaca makes a sea kayak now, so you could paddle around Lizard Island
Do
if you
they
wanted to.
now? Do
Yeah.
they? Oh, that's going to be my first Google search after we finish this conversation, I think. So, what makes you curious? What's your curiosity sort of angling towards now? Have you got something that's on the radar, or have you got something that's a long way away that you still want to do? A place, a location, a new means of transport?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm these days I'm sort of into science. Like, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a scientist, and I was interested in nature, and I kept like journals, and I recorded observations. And then I became a teenager, and my hormones had me like chase girls and want to scare myself and climb mountains and whatnot. And then I got married and raised kids, and now I'm kind of on that. I'm like, not I'm over the hill. I'm kind of falling off a cliff on the other side. I'm 65, and so I don't really need to scare myself anymore. I don't even want to, and I'm not quite as physically able as I used to be, and but intellectually, I still really like science, and I love
Mm,
the emotion of discovery. Like emotion is what we feel. Emotions are things that. Emotions are really what we feel when hormones are released by our glands, whereas our brain is something that's neurons processing electricity, basically. And so I find discovery is an emotional reaction, and it's a hormonal reaction. And I really love discovering things in data and data that I've collected in wild
okay.
places that I've been.
Yeah.
And then in Alaska right now, because of the Trump administration, two iconic places in the Brooks Range. And the Brooks Range are the mountains in northern Alaska. It's like a 1,000-kilometer long mountain range from Canada to the Chukchi Sea on the Arctic Ocean opposite Russia. And in the northeastern part of the Brooks Range is this, iconic porcupine caribou herd um, calving ground, and they've wanted to drill for oil, and now our president wants is going to force everybody to
Wow.
drill for oil. And then meanwhile, that's near this community called Kaktovik. It's like a um, Eskimo village, if you will. And then on the other end of the Brooks Range is Kotzebue, and uh, and near Kotzebue, they want to mine. They're going to put in a road because only one road is in the Brooks Range right now, but they want to put a second road. So here's a 1,000-kilometer long wilderness that's only got one road and it only cuts across. Now they want to put like a 500-kilometer road along through the wilderness of the Brooks Range to a big mine. And so I want to do this pack rafting trip, which would be 1,000 miles, but 750 miles would be floating rivers. So about 250
Wow.
miles of walking that would go from that calving ground across the Brooks Range and then go down the river that would parallel, or rivers, a series of rivers that would parallel where they want to put this road before it all happens.
Yeah. So is this you potentially lining yourself up to be the next Bob Brown? Is this you going to defend these wilderness areas down the line? Because obviously people don't understand somewhere until they are exposed to it, or they see it, or they feel it, or they're told about it. That's when you fall in love with something. So you, in a way, as a very highly educated, adventurous person, to go out there and share that story of the solitude is probably one of the greatest gifts you can probably give back.
Yeah, that would be a goal. I don't Bob Brown's a pretty high bar but it's a direction I would love to go in. Absolutely. Some
Yeah.
a means of calling attention to these places because honestly, the 21st century, the only thing we can do as conservationists in the 21st century now is to protect the last really big blocks
Yeah,
of
yeah,
wildness that are left, especially as climate, we can't stop the climate change that is happening. We can slow it down. We can stop pouring
mm,
gas on the fire, but things are changing, and only by having really big blocks of wild places can the organisms that we share this earth with, can they move unimpeded to find
yes.
like climatic refuge from what's coming.
It's a great term, climatic refuge, absolutely. To view your story, we're unfortunately drawing to the close on what we can talk about, Roman. It's been fascinating. I've seen the light slowly disappear in the background there, so obviously it's coming towards the end of our time together. And where do we follow your story? Where's the best place to hear and read all about the adventures you've done and the adventures you're looking forward to?
Wow. Well, I used to keep a blog. I don't really put anything on it anymore, but it's called the Roaming Dials, like Roaming, like to roam and wander.
Hmm.
And that has a bunch of old stuff on it. And I don't post things about where to go anymore because it just spreads too quickly. And then,
Yes.
I see people who,
Wilderness is no longer wilderness when all of a sudden you've got lots of people there. I agree with you.
yeah, and I think the Brooks Range is a place that really is one of the few places left on Earth where you can go and find your own way and discover things on your own, like a human animal instead of like a civilized human who just gets all their information from another human. So I feel like it's really valuable to protect that kind of experience by not sharing that information. And then I have an Instagram. I post on Instagram sometimes. I'm not trying to get a lot of followers. I mean, I don't mind having followers, but I'm not. I just, you know, I don't know why I post on Instagram. I think I
It's
had
an
here's
outlet.
it is now that I had a bunch of photos that somebody scanned from the 80s and 90s, and the same guy that introduced me to the Packraft idea, he would post his old photos from the 40s and 50s on Facebook.
Mm,
And I thought, oh, I'd like to post all of my old photos on Facebook, but all my friends who are boomers, they would just tease me and ridicule me for whatever reasons they want to. Whereas all the boomers liked Dick Griffith posting his old
yes.
pictures because he
Yeah.
was in 95, 96, 97, 98 posting these old things. So I thought, well, I'll post them on Instagram where, younger people can sort of see, especially in Alaska, where, bike rafting started or pack rafting
Yeah.
started or
Yeah.
Brooks Range traverses
Well,
or wilderness classics.
you feel the authenticity and the genuine nature of early adventure. I think today there are. I'm taking nothing away from people that go and embark on their own adventures when they're sort of in their late teens, 20s, 30s, but it's all done for the shareability of it rather than the authenticity. It's very hard to find people that go there purely for being in the moment with the people around them and not to a greater audience. So showing those photos, I mean, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about the early photos of even me in my Land Rover, in 2000s, going there and exploring parts of Africa, thinking about those photos where you took the time to take a photo on film and to share that moment. Everything wasn't perfectly manicured, ready for that photo. It was just in the moment. It was raw, it was rough, and it was honest. So I think I'm going to go back through your feed. I'm certainly going to go and have a look at some of that stuff now. Roman, it was fascinating. I'm afraid I've got to wrap it there. I love the insights. I love the sharing of the adventures from Alaska all the way down to the beautiful Isle of Tasmania, which is almost a little bit of New Zealand rather than Australia. So if you're watching this from around the world, get yourself over to this part of the world if you get a chance. If you love the chat, hit follow and share it with someone who needs a little different adventure in their life. If you're looking to get gear to fuel your next great idea, whether it's taking on a river, an ocean, a trail with the kids, check out wildearth.com.au. And we'll see you next time for more wild stories from the trail, the road, and the edge of the map. Thanks, Roman.
Thank you, Ben. That was great.